Colombian billionaire mafia boss pretends to be homeless just to find love, and got obsessed. Adrian Cruz had killed men for looking at him wrong. He had buried a knife in the ribs of a man who tried to poison his father's whiskey. And yet here he was, standing in freezing rain outside a soup kitchen in the worst part of Chicago, waiting in a line of 40 strangers for a bowl of soup he did not need, wearing a coat that was not his own, and a name that was not his own either, because for 1 single hour a day, nobody in that line knew who he really was, and for 1 single hour a day, that was the only thing in the world he actually wanted. 3 weeks earlier, a bullet meant for his skull had instead taken a chunk out of a marble pillar 18 inches from his head, fired by a man who had worked for his family for 11 years and smiled at Adrian's birthday dinner not 4 days before he tried to end his life. That was the moment Adrian Cruz stopped trusting anyone in his own world. Not his men, not his mother, not the woman his family had already half promised him to since childhood. Everyone around him wanted something. His money, his protection, his name, his death. Nobody wanted him, the actual man underneath all of it, because nobody had ever been given the chance to meet that man at all. So he had made a decision that would have gotten any other boss laughed out of his own organization. He would disappear, quietly, 1 night a week into a version of Chicago where nobody knew his face, and he would find out once and for all whether a single honest human being on earth could still look at him and see anything other than a fortune waiting to be taken. He did not expect to find her behind a folding table, ladling soup into paper bowls with the kind of tired, stubborn kindness that had clearly survived worse nights than his own. "You're new," she said when he reached the front of the line, studying him with sharp brown eyes that missed absolutely nothing. "I know most of the regulars by now. You don't move like someone who's been out here long."
"Does it matter how long?" Adrian asked, and immediately regretted the accent he had not bothered to soften, the precise, unhurried way he spoke that did not belong to a man who had actually been sleeping in doorways. "No," she said simply, filling his bowl generously, more than she gave the man before him. "It doesn't matter to me at all. Here, careful, it's hot." Her name, printed crooked on a laminated tag clipped to her apron, was Maya. She had copper hair pulled back in a messy knot, a soft, curvy build she carried like she had long ago stopped caring what anyone thought of it, and a way of looking directly at people, actually at them, not through them, that Adrian had not experienced from another human being in longer than he could remember. "Thank you," he said, and meant it more than he had meant almost anything in 3 weeks. "Don't thank me," Maya said, already turning to the next man in line. "Just come back tomorrow if you need to. We don't run out." He did come back. Not the next day. A boss could not disappear 2 nights running without his absence becoming a question someone eventually asked out loud, but the following week, and the week after that, and by the 4th visit, Maya had started saving him the corner seat by the radiator without being asked, and Adrian Cruz, who owned 4 buildings on the very street that soup kitchen stood on and had never once set foot inside any of them, found himself counting the days between visits like a man counting down to something he was terrified to name. He saw the other side of her on his 5th visit, not the calm, generous woman ladling soup with practiced patience, but a woman standing in the alley behind the building with a phone pressed to her ear, voice tight and controlled in the particular way of someone refusing to let it shake. "I understand the grant fell through," she was saying, "but I need you to understand what that means on this end. It means the boiler doesn't get fixed. It means 40 people don't get a hot meal in January. I am not asking you to feel sorry for us. I am asking you to reconsider the number, because the number you gave me does not survive contact with reality." A pause, her jaw tightening. "Fine. Thank you for your time." She hung up and stood very still for a moment, one hand pressed flat against the brick wall, breathing.
Adrian, watching from the doorway, said nothing at first, unsure whether his presence would be welcome or an intrusion into a moment she had not chosen to share. "You can stop hovering, Leo," Maya said, without turning around. "I know you're there. I can hear you not breathing very loudly." I did not want to interrupt. "You're not interrupting.
You're just watching me lose a fight with a spreadsheet." She turned, exhaling hard, some of the tension bleeding out of her shoulders now that the mask was back in place. "Grant renewal fell through. Boiler's been dying for 2 months. I'll figure it out. I always figure it out." "How?" Adrian asked, genuinely curious, because he had spent 11 years solving problems by making a single phone call and watching millions of dollars move without effort, and the idea of a boiler standing between 40 people and a warm meal with no easy solution behind it unsettled him in a way he had not expected. Bake sales, extra shifts. Ella's part-time paycheck goes further than it should, and she'll deny that if you ask her because she's 17 and proud like her sister. Maya shrugged, the gesture almost casual, though nothing about her voice was. "It's not glamorous. It's not always enough, but giving up was never actually an option, so I stopped treating it like one a long time ago." Adrian thought, standing in that cold alley, of the 11-figure empire waiting for him 3 miles away, of the ease with which he could have fixed this exact problem with a signature and never thought about it again. And he thought too of Hector's warning about 2 worlds finding each other, and said nothing, because the boiler was fixed 2 weeks later by an anonymous donation routed through 6 shell accounts Hector would later swear he had no memory of setting up, and Maya never once suspected the source, and Adrian discovered, to his own considerable surprise, that giving something away and receiving nothing but her relief in return felt more satisfying than any deal he had closed in a decade. "You're not like the others," Maya said one night, 4 weeks in, sitting across from him at the end of a folding table long after most of the line had cleared out, sharing the last of the coffee from a dented thermos. "Most people who've actually lived rough, they eat fast, guard the bowl. You eat like you're not scared someone's going to take it from you."
Adrian's spoon paused halfway to his mouth. He had not thought of that. Of course he had not thought of that, because he had never once in his life needed to guard a bowl of soup, and the lie he was living had holes in it he had never bothered to check for. "Old habit," he said carefully. "From before." "Before what?" "Before things were different," Adrian said, which was true in a way that told her nothing at all, and Maya studied him for a long moment with an expression that made him wonder, uncomfortably, exactly how much of him she could already see through the coat and the false name and 4 weeks of careful half-truths. "You don't talk like anyone else who comes through this line," she said finally. "Educated, careful, like every word costs you something to spend." She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "I'm not trying to pry. Everybody who ends up here has a reason they don't want to talk about it. I notice things. It's sort of an occupational hazard, running a place like this. You learn to read people fast, or you get taken advantage of fast." "What do you read in me?" Adrian asked, and the question came out rawer than he intended, more exposed than a man like him ever allowed himself to sound. Maya considered him for a long moment, the fluorescent light overhead flickering once, twice, casting her face in and out of shadow. "Someone carrying something heavy," she said finally. "Something he doesn't think anyone would understand, even if he told them the truth." Adrian's chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with the cold outside. "You might be right about that. You don't have to tell me," Maya said, gentle in a way that undid something in him far more efficiently than any interrogation ever could have. "I just want you to know somebody's paying attention. That's all. Some nights that's the only thing that actually helps." He did not sleep that night. Not in the safe house apartment he kept for these nights away from his empire. Not anywhere. Because for the first time in 11 years, since the night his father was gunned down in front of him at 19 years old, and the entire weight of an empire had landed on his shoulders overnight, someone had looked directly at Adrian Cruz and seen a man carrying something heavy, instead of a name, a fortune, or a threat. He learned things about her over the following weeks that he had no right to know, and every intention of remembering forever. That she ran the soup kitchen on a shoestring budget stitched together from a part-time nursing job, a small inheritance from a grandmother who had raised her, and sheer stubbornness. That she had a younger sister, Ella, 17 and sharp-tongued, and still grieving a mother who had died of an illness the family could never quite afford to treat properly,
and that Maya had been raising her essentially alone for the last 2 years, while their father drank himself somewhere Maya no longer bothered tracking. That she had been engaged once to a man who left the moment her mother's medical bills started eating into every plan they had ever made together, and that she had rebuilt herself since then into someone who did not apologize for taking up space in a world that had tried repeatedly to make her small. "You get used to people leaving," she told him one night, more openly than she usually allowed herself to be, "and then you get tired of getting used to it. So you just decide, one day, that leaving is the thing they do, not the thing that happens to you. You keep standing, even when it would honestly be easier not to." "That is the strongest thing I have ever heard anyone say," Adrian said, and meant every word of it with a sincerity that startled even him. Maya laughed, surprised and a little embarrassed by the intensity in his voice. "It's not strength, Leo. It's just stubbornness with better PR. Leo." The name sat strangely in his chest every time she used it, a small lie growing heavier with every week that passed. And Adrian Cruz, a man who had ordered violence without blinking, who had buried enemies without losing a night of sleep over it, found himself lying awake in his real bed, in his real mansion, aching over a fake name, because the woman who used it had somehow, impossibly, become the only person on earth he actually wanted to be honest with. He did not know, sitting there in the dark, turning her words over and over in his mind, that his cousin Tomas had already noticed his weekly disappearances, had already hired someone quiet and thorough to find out exactly where his cousin vanished to every Thursday night, and had already begun, carefully and patiently, building a plan around whatever he found.
The betrayal that nearly killed him 3 weeks earlier had a name Adrian had not spoken aloud since the night it happened, because saying it made real something he still could not fully process. Tomas Cruz, his father's brother's son, the man who had stood beside him at his father's funeral with his hand on Adrian's shoulder and sworn in front of the entire family that blood meant something in this business, even when nothing else did. Adrian had not been able to prove Tomas ordered the hit. The shooter had died before he could be questioned properly, a convenient bullet finding him in a holding cell that should have been secure. And every thread Adrian pulled since then had led to dead ends that felt too clean to be coincidence. He had no proof. He had only instinct. And 11 years of running an empire had taught him that instinct kept men alive far more reliably than proof ever did. So he watched Tomas, carefully, quietly, giving away nothing, while underneath the watching, a different, smaller, more dangerous part of his life kept unfolding every Thursday night in a soup kitchen 3 miles from his own front gate. A part of his life he had begun, without meaning to, protecting far more fiercely than the empire itself. Hector, Adrian said one evening, to the one man in his organization he still trusted without reservation, his father's oldest friend, a broad, silver-haired man who had taught Adrian to shoot a gun and tie a tie in the same week when he was 12 years old. "I need you to watch someone for me. Not Tomas, someone else, a woman." Hector's eyebrows rose, though his face otherwise gave away nothing. "This have to do with where you disappear to on Thursdays?" Adrian's silence was answer enough. "Does she know who you are?" "No, Adrian." Hector's voice went careful, the particular careful of a man who had watched Adrian's father make exactly this kind of mistake once, decades ago, with consequences neither of them had ever fully spoken about since. "You understand what happens if the wrong people find out there is a woman you care about who does not have protection, does not have security, does not even know the danger she is standing next to every single week."
"I know exactly what happens," Adrian said quietly. "That is precisely why I am asking you to watch her, instead of leaving her exposed while I figure out how to fix this." Hector studied him for a long moment, something that might have been sympathy, or might have been old grief, moving behind his eyes. "Your father made this same choice once," he said finally, "before your mother. He told himself he could keep 2 lives separate. He could not. Nobody can, Adrian. Sooner or later, the 2 worlds find each other, and when they do, it is always the person with the least power in the room who pays for it.
Then I will make sure she has power, Adrian said, low and absolute. Watch her, Hector, please. Hector nodded once and left without another word, and neither of them noticed Tomas Cruz standing at the far end of the hallway, close enough to have heard every word, his expression carefully, dangerously blank. The first warning came 2 weeks later, and Adrian very nearly missed it entirely. He was 3 blocks from the soup kitchen, coat collar turned up against the cold, when he noticed the same gray sedan idling at the corner he had passed 10 minutes earlier. A small thing, the kind of detail that would have meant nothing to anyone who had not spent 11 years training himself to notice exactly this sort of small thing. He did not go straight to the soup kitchen that night. He circled 2 blocks out of his way, doubled back through an alley he knew connected to a bodega or the rear exit, and watched from the shadows as the same sedan crawled slowly past the soup kitchen's front window 20 minutes later, a man in the passenger seat photographing the building with a phone held low against his chest, trying not to be noticed. Adrian did not recognize the man's face, but he recognized the posture, the discipline of it, the particular economy of movement that belonged to someone trained rather than merely curious, and his stomach dropped with a cold, familiar dread that had nothing to do with the winter air. He called Hector from the bodega's back doorway, voice low and urgent. Someone is watching the soup kitchen. Professional, not police. Tomas, Hector said, without hesitation, the single word landing like a confirmation of something he had already half suspected. I told you this would happen, Adrian. 2 worlds. They do not stay separate no matter how carefully you try to keep the doors shut between them. I need to know how much he knows. I will find out, Hector said. In the meantime, you do not go near that building again until I have answers. I mean that, Adrian, not as your father's friend, as the man responsible for keeping you alive.
Adrian did not listen, not entirely. He went back 3 days later anyway, unable to stay away, telling himself he was only checking that Maya was safe, and found her exactly where she always was, unaware that somewhere out in the cold, a stranger with a camera had already built a file with her face in it, and that the quiet, careful life Adrian had built to protect her was already, invisibly, coming apart at the seams. He should have told her that night. He told himself, walking home in the dark, with the weight of that unspoken warning sitting heavy in his chest, that he would find the right moment, the right words, a way to explain the danger without unraveling the fragile, precious thing that had grown between them over 2 months of Thursday nights. He did not get the chance to choose that moment on his own terms. The choice was taken from him 3 days later, when a photographer's flash caught his face at exactly the wrong angle at Maya's fundraising gala, and the quiet unraveling he had been dreading began instead all at once, in front of a room full of strangers with cameras. The jealousy arrived, as these things always seem to in Adrian's world, wrapped in silk and delivered by his mother. Valeria is coming to dinner Sunday, his mother informed him over the phone, in the particular tone that made it clear the sentence was not a request. It has been 6 months since you have properly courted her, Adrian. Her family is asking questions. I am running out of excuses to give them. I do not want to marry Valeria, Adrian said, for what felt like the 100th time in 4 years. Wanting has very little to do with it, his mother said. Her family's shipping routes secured half of what your father built. You know this. You have always known this. Adrian said nothing, because there was nothing to say that would change an arrangement that had been decided before he was old enough to have an opinion about it. And Sunday dinner happened exactly as his mother intended. Valeria Suarez arriving in a dress the color of good wine, beautiful and sharp and utterly uninterested in Adrian as a person, only in what marrying him would secure for her family's empire. You seem distracted, Valeria observed over dessert, studying him with the same assessing precision she studied everything, a woman who had been raised, much like him, to treat every relationship as a transaction first and anything else a distant second. Is there someone else occupying your attention, Adrian? Business, Adrian said, which was not entirely a lie, since the business of protecting Maya from a danger she did not know existed had occupied more of his attention lately than his actual empire.
How convenient that business always seems to be the answer whenever I ask you a direct question. Valeria's smile was thin and knowing. I do not need you to love me, Adrian. I have never needed that from this arrangement. But I would prefer not to be humiliated by whatever it is currently keeping you so distracted, if you would extend me that small courtesy. Adrian looked at her, genuinely looked at her, for perhaps the first time in years, and saw a woman as trapped by her own family's ambitions as he was by his,
and something in his chest, already stretched thin by weeks of living two lives at once, cracked further under the weight of it. "I will find a way to end this arrangement properly," he said quietly. "You deserve better than being a line item in two families' balance sheets, Valeria. So do I." Valeria's carefully composed face flickered, just once, with something that looked almost like relief. "Careful, Adrian," she said, low enough that only he could hear it. "Your mother is watching us right now like a woman planning a wedding. If you actually mean that, you had better be prepared for exactly how much noise ending it will make." Neither of them noticed Tomas, seated at the far end of the table, watching the entire exchange with quiet, calculating interest, filing away one more piece of leverage in a plan that had already begun moving, whether Adrian knew it yet or not. The secret nearly came apart on a Thursday night in early winter, when Maya's soup kitchen ran a fundraising gala to keep the doors open through the coldest months, and a local news crew showed up to cover it. And Adrian Cruz, standing at the edge of the room in his worn coat, watched in cold horror as a photographer's flash caught his face at exactly the wrong angle, exactly long enough for the footage to make the 10 o'clock broadcast 3 hours later. He did not find out until the next morning, standing in his own kitchen with real coffee in a real mug, when Hector burst into the room holding a tablet with the local news clip already queued up, Adrian's own face, unmistakably his own face, despite the worn coat and 3 weeks of deliberately unshaven stubble, frozen mid-frame at the edge of a segment about the city's homelessness crisis. "It aired at 10, Hector said grimly. "It has been online since 11.
Tomas has almost certainly already seen it, Adrian, which means every enemy you have made in 11 years running this family now knows exactly where to find the one person who could make you bleed." Adrian's blood went cold, not for himself, for Maya, standing behind a folding table 3 miles away, with absolutely no idea that the quiet, careful man she had been sharing coffee with for 2 months was about to become the most dangerous thing in her entire life. He drove to the soup kitchen himself, breaking every rule about exposure he had set for himself in 11 years of careful survival, and found Maya exactly where he always found her, ladling soup with the same tired, stubborn kindness, completely unaware that the world she thought she understood was about to be torn open. "Leo," she started, smiling, before she saw his face, and the smile died instantly. "What's wrong?" "I need to tell you something," Adrian said, "and I need you to understand that everything I am about to say I should have told you weeks ago, and I am sorrier than I know how to say that I didn't." Maya's expression shifted, wariness sliding in fast and hard. "Leo, you're scaring me." "My name is not Leo," he said, and watched with a helplessness he had not felt since he was 19 years old and watching his father die on a marble floor, as every piece of trust he had spent 2 months carefully building began visibly to crack apart on her face. "My name is Adrian Cruz," he said, before she could pull away entirely, the words coming faster now, desperate to get the truth out before the lie could finish doing whatever damage it was already doing. "I did not come to this soup kitchen because I needed food, Maya. I came because 3 weeks before I first walked through that door, someone I trusted tried to kill me, and I could not tell anymore who in my own life actually saw me as a person instead of a target or an opportunity. I came here to disappear for 1 hour a week. I never expected—" "Stop." Maya's voice had gone very quiet, very controlled, in a way that frightened him far more than shouting would have. "You lied to me for 2 months. About your name, about your life, about everything. I know."
"Do you know what I told you?" Her voice cracked, fury and hurt tangled together so tightly neither of them could have separated one from the other. "About my sister, about my mother, about Marcus leaving the second things got hard. I told you things I have never told anyone, Adrian or Leo or whoever you actually are, because I actually believed that for once in my life someone was seeing me without an angle. And this whole time you were the one running the angle." "It was never an angle," Adrian said, desperation breaking through the careful control he had spent 11 years perfecting.
Maya, I have watched grown men lie to my face for money more times than I can count. I know exactly what an angle looks like. What happened between us was never that. It became the only real thing in my entire life. How am I supposed to believe that? Maya said, tears finally spilling despite every effort she was clearly making to hold them back, when the first true thing you have told me in 2 months is that everything before this moment was a lie. Before Adrian could answer, before either of them could close the widening distance the truth had just torn open between them, his phone buzzed once, sharp and insistent, and Hector's voice came through, tight with an urgency that turned Adrian's blood to ice. Adrian, Tomas made his move. He knows about her. You need to get to that soup kitchen right now because he is already sending men, and I do not think he intends for either of you to survive whatever happens next. Get down, Adrian said, already moving, already pulling Maya behind the same folding table she had ladled 1,000 bowls of soup across, his voice gone flat and lethal in a way she had never once heard from the man she thought she knew as Leo. Now, Maya, please. What is happening? My cousin, Adrian said, scanning the room, the careful stillness of a man calculating exits and threats simultaneously. He is wrong about what you are to me, but he is not wrong that he can use you to hurt me, and I am not going to let that happen.
The front door of the soup kitchen slammed open, and 2 men Adrian recognized instantly. Tomas's men. The same careful, disciplined violence he had trained half his own organization to carry, stepped through with weapons already drawn, and for one suspended, terrible second, the entire room went utterly silent. "Where is she?" one of them said, eyes sweeping the room, landing on Adrian with a flicker of confused recognition before understanding hit fully. "Boss, put the weapons down," Adrian said, standing slowly, deliberately placing himself between the gunman and the table where Maya crouched, hands raised in a gesture that was somehow both surrender and command at once. "Whatever Tomas told you, whatever he is paying you, it is not worth what happens to you if you pull those triggers in this room. Tomas said you'd lost your mind over some woman," the second gunman said, uncertain now, weapon wavering slightly. "Said you were compromised. Weak. Tomas is wrong," Adrian said, voice dropping into something ancient and dangerous, the voice of a man who had buried his own father's killers with his own 2 hands and never once hesitated. "And you are both about to find out exactly how wrong, unless you walk out that door right now and tell him you could not find either one of us here." The silence stretched, taut and endless, until somewhere behind Adrian, Maya's voice cut through it, steady, impossibly steady, despite everything. "There are children who eat here," she said, standing slowly despite Adrian's sharp, silent protest, meeting the gunman's eyes with a fearlessness that made something in Adrian's chest ache violently. "If you are going to do something unforgivable in this building, you had better be prepared to live with exactly what that cost you, because I promise you, it will cost you more than whatever Tomas is paying." The first gunman's jaw tightened, some flicker of conscience or calculation shifting behind his eyes, and after a long, agonizing moment, he lowered his weapon fractionally.
"This isn't over," he said, backing toward the door, his partner following. "Tomas isn't going to let this go." They vanished into the night, and the second the door swung shut behind them, Maya's legs gave out, and Adrian caught her before she hit the floor, both of them shaking, both of them alive in a way that felt, for one raw and terrifying moment, like the only truth that mattered anymore. "You should have told me," Maya said later, much later, sitting wrapped in a blanket in the back office of the soup kitchen, while Hector's men secured the perimeter outside, her voice hoarse from adrenaline and tears both. "Not because I deserve to know your secrets, because I deserve to know I was in danger, Adrian. That's different from lying about your name." "You're right," Adrian said, sitting across from her, close enough to touch, but deliberately not, giving her the space her fury and fear both required. "I told myself I was protecting you by keeping you separate from that world. I understand now that I was only protecting myself from having to face what it would cost me to lose you if you knew the truth and walked away." "And if I walk away now," Maya asked quietly, "now that I know everything,
"Then I will make certain you are safe for the rest of your life regardless," Adrian said, and meant it with a certainty that surprised even him. "That was never conditional on you choosing me, Maya. It was never supposed to be." Maya studied him for a long moment, the blanket pulled tight around her shoulders, exhaustion and fear, and something far more complicated moving across her face. "Tell me something true," she said finally. "Not about your family, not about tonight. Something true about you, Leo, Adrian, whoever you actually are underneath all of it." Adrian was quiet for a moment, searching for something honest enough to offer her after everything the lie had already cost them both. "I have not cried since my father died," he said finally, voice low. "I taught myself it was a weakness I could not afford, in a world where every weakness gets found and used against you eventually." He looked at her, something raw finally breaking loose behind his careful control. "Watching those men point weapons at you tonight, I came closer to breaking that particular rule than I have in over a decade."
Not because of what almost happened to me, because of what almost happened to you, over a lie I told to protect a version of myself I was too afraid to admit didn't actually deserve protecting. Maya's breath caught, tears rising again despite everything. "That's true," she said quietly. "That's actually true. It is the truest thing I have said to you since the day we met," Adrian said. "Everything else was a lie built to hide from a world I no longer trusted. That was never a lie." She did not call him for 4 days. Maya spent those 4 days doing something she was not proud of, sitting up late after Ella had gone to bed, searching his real name on a laptop that felt suddenly like it was showing her a stranger's life instead of the man she thought she had come to know one bowl of soup at a time. The articles were worse than she expected. Federal investigations that had gone nowhere. Rival organizations that had lost men in wars connected, however distantly, to the crew's name. A photograph of Adrian at 22, unsmiling beside a casket, the caption identifying the funeral of a man his own father's organization had allegedly ordered killed years earlier. She closed the laptop at 2 in the morning, hands cold, chest tight with a fear that had nothing to do with the men who had pointed guns at her, and everything to do with the question she could not stop asking herself. How much of the gentle, careful, endlessly patient man in the soup kitchen was real, and how much of him belonged to the world in those articles instead? "You're allowed to be scared of what you found," Ella said the next morning, watching her sister stare into a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. "That doesn't mean you have to run from it. It just means you get to ask him about it instead of deciding the answer on your own at 2 in the morning." "Since when did you get so wise?" Maya muttered, though she was already reaching for her phone. "Since I watched you almost let a good thing walk away because you were too busy being brave alone instead of asking for help," Ella said. "Call him, Maya. Ask him the actual questions. He came here every single week after you found out the truth. That has to count for something."
So, Maya called him and asked him every hard question the articles had raised, and Adrian answered every single one, without flinching or softening the truth to make himself sound better than he was. Admitted to violence he was not proud of, admitted to choices made in the name of survival that he could not undo, and did not pretend to regret entirely, because pretending would have been one more lie, and he had promised her, standing in that back office with a blanket around her shoulders, that he was done with those. "I am not going to tell you that world is not dangerous," he said, quiet and steady over the phone, "or that I have not done things in it that would frighten you if you knew the details. I am telling you that everything I have done since the night I met you, I have done trying to become someone you would not need to be afraid of. I do not know if that is enough. I only know it is the truth, and you deserve nothing less than that from me, whatever you decide to do with it." It was not a fix. It did not erase 4 sleepless nights or the fear those articles had put in her chest. But it was honest in a way that mattered more to Maya than any perfect answer could have,
And 3 days later, she found herself back at the soup kitchen on a Thursday that was not officially a shift for either of them, waiting by the same folding table where it had all started to see if he would show up anyway. He did. The days that followed were not simple, because untangling two lives that had never been meant to touch each other was never going to be simple. Adrian moved against Tomas with the full, cold precision of a man who had spent 11 years learning exactly how to protect what mattered. Evidence gathered quietly through Hector's network, old loyalties called in, until the truth of Tomas's betrayal, both the assassination attempt 3 weeks earlier and the attack on the soup kitchen, sat undeniable in front of the family council that had once sworn blind loyalty to blood over everything else.
Tomas did not go quietly.
But he went, exiled from the only family and empire he had ever known, stripped of the power he had tried twice to seize by force, and the war he had threatened to bring never fully materialized, because the moment the rest of the organization saw exactly how far Adrian was willing to go to protect what he cared about, nobody remaining dared test that same resolve twice. Valeria's engagement dissolved within the month, both families quietly renegotiating the alliance on business terms alone, a conversation that ended unexpectedly, with Valeria sending Adrian a short, dry note that read only, "Glad one of us finally had the courage to end this properly. Do try not to get shot again. Some of us still need you solvent." Maya did not come back to him easily, and Adrian did not expect her to. He showed up at the soup kitchen every single week regardless, not as Leo, never again as Leo, but as exactly who he was, security discreetly stationed outside now, his real name spoken plainly to anyone who asked, and he ladled soup beside her in a borrowed apron that fit him badly, and he listened when she talked, and he did not push for anything more than she was ready to give. "You're persistent," Maya said, 6 weeks after the truth came out, watching him fumble with an industrial-sized soup ladle with far less grace than the situation probably called for. "I have been told that is one of my more redeeming qualities," Adrian said, "somewhere underneath the parts of me that lie about my name for 2 months at a time." Maya almost smiled. Almost. The first real crack in the careful distance she had kept between them since that terrible night. "You really are trying," she said, quieter now, something softening in her voice despite herself. "I am trying," Adrian agreed, "because you are the only thing that has ever made me want to be someone worth trusting, Maya. Not Leo, not the version of myself I built to hide from a world that only ever wanted my money or my fear. You saw something worth staying for before you even knew my real name, and I would very much like the chance to spend the rest of my life proving that you were right to." Maya set down her ladle slowly, studying him with the same sharp, unflinching attention she had studied him with the very first night, when he had been nothing to her but a stranger in a borrowed coat. "That's a big thing to promise," she said. "I know," Adrian said. "I intend to keep it anyway."
It took months, not weeks, for trust to rebuild itself into something solid enough to stand on. Months of Adrian showing up, consistent and honest in a way the lie had never allowed him to be. Months of Maya slowly, carefully, allowing herself to believe that the man underneath the truth was worth the risk of loving after everything Marcus and every other disappointment in her life had taught her about trusting too easily. He met Ella properly in the spring, nervous in a way that startled Maya. This cold, powerful man who commanded an empire with a glance, suddenly fumbling over how to talk to a 17-year-old who studied him with the same sharp, skeptical eyes as her sister. "So you're the Mafia guy," Ella said, unimpressed, arms crossed, standing in the doorway of the apartment Maya shared with her sister. "I am," Adrian admitted. "And you lied to my sister for 2 months pretending to be homeless." "I did." "That's genuinely one of the worst things I've ever heard," Ella said, "and also kind of the most insane romantic thing I've ever heard, and I hate that both those things are true at once." Adrian, despite everything, laughed, a real, startled laugh that surprised him as much as it surprised the 2 women watching him. "That," he said, "is an entirely fair assessment." He earned Ella's trust the way he earned everything worth having in his life now, slowly, honestly,
showing up week after week until skepticism gave way to something warmer, until the scholarship fund he quietly established for the soup kitchen's regular families included, without either sister ever asking, a full ride waiting for Ella the moment she was ready to use it. "You have to stop doing things like that without telling us," Maya said, the night she found out, sitting across from him on the same soup kitchen bench where they had first shared coffee from a dented thermos almost a year earlier. "Would you have accepted it if I asked first?" "No," Maya admitted. "Probably not." "Then I am not sorry," Adrian said simply, "for finding a way around your stubbornness on this particular subject." Maya laughed, warm and real, the sound of it settling something loose and aching in Adrian's chest that had been unsettled since the night his father died. "You're impossible," she said.
"I have been told that as well," Adrian said, "usually by people who were right about it. He proposed on a night that meant more to both of them than any grand gesture could have, not on a terrace overlooking an ocean, not with an audience, but in the same soup kitchen where they had met. After closing, the folding table stacked away and the fluorescent lights turned low, Maya still in her worn apron and Adrian still fumbling occasionally with a ladle he had never quite mastered the art of using gracefully. "I have nothing poetic prepared," he admitted, kneeling in front of her with a small velvet box that felt suddenly enormous in his shaking hands. "I have spent 11 years learning to say exactly the right thing to exactly the right person for exactly the right effect. And standing here in front of you, I find I only know how to tell you the truth. I love you, Maya Bennett. Not the version of me you thought you loved first, and not despite everything that version cost us, but because, somehow, impossibly, you loved the real man underneath it, before you even knew his name. I do not know how I got fortunate enough to be found by someone like that. I only know I do not intend to spend the rest of my life wondering. Marry me." Maya was laughing and crying at once, the exact way she had promised herself she would never let a man make her feel again, and said yes before he had even finished opening the box completely, because some truths she had learned in the strangest, most impossible year of her life were worth saying yes to with your whole guarded heart, even when they began with the most complicated lie. They married in the fall, in the same soup kitchen's small back garden, string lights instead of chandeliers, folding chairs instead of gilded ones, Ella standing as maid of honor with tears she pretended not to be crying, Hector walking Maya down a short aisle of donated flowers because her own father had never sobered up long enough to be asked. "You once told me," Adrian said quietly at the altar, just for her, "that people leave, that it's the thing they do, not the thing that happens to you." "I remember," Maya said, smiling through tears.
"I intend to spend the rest of my life proving that rule wrong," Adrian Cruz said, and meant it with every fractured, hard-won, fully honest piece of himself. The boss, the liar who had learned to stop lying, and finally, at long last, simply the man underneath all of it, standing exactly where he had never once expected to end up, found, completely and permanently, by a woman who had first seen him worth saving before she ever knew his name. They did not disappear into some untouchable, gilded version of life after that, because that was never who either of them actually was. And building something false a second time was never going to be a mistake Adrian made twice. He restructured pieces of the empire in the months that followed, quietly moving legitimate holdings, real estate, shipping contracts, the buildings he had owned for years without ever once setting foot inside them, into a foundation that funded soup kitchens and shelters across the city, with Maya, at her own insistence, sitting on the board that decided exactly where the money went. "I am not going to be someone whose name is only attached to money because it's convenient for guilt to have somewhere to hide," she told him, the first time he offered to simply write the checks and let her run the rest without his interference. "If your name is on this now, you show up. You learn the families. You stop being someone who fixes problems from a distance, Adrian, because that was the whole reason we almost lost each other in the first place." So he showed up. He learned the families, badly at first, awkward in rooms he did not know how to read the way he read a boardroom, and steadily better as the months passed, until the soup kitchen where he had once hidden behind a stranger's name became the place he was most fully, unguardedly himself. Not the boss, not the liar, not even entirely the billionaire whose real name the whole city now recognized, but simply Adrian,
ladling soup beside his wife on Thursday nights, still fumbling occasionally with the industrial ladle, still counting every week he got to stand beside her as a kind of quiet, ongoing miracle he had never expected his life to contain.